Okay, so it's going to be on Lesson 7, cell size and transport. Because it's an activity, you don't have anything in your notes necessarily about this. Okay. So quick review. The 3 transport processes we talked about on Friday, okay, are osmosis, well, we talked mostly about them today too, diffusion and active transport, right? The key features for each one. For osmosis, the key feature is that it is moving only water, and it is doing that across the membrane in order to balance solutes. Okay? Solutes are generally salts, but they can also be things like glucose and stuff like that. Okay? And that it is passive. Right? It is a passive process, means it happens with no investment of energy, but it also always happens. The cell has no control over that process. Okay? Now, remember, osmosis is across the membrane. Osmosis doesn't work within the cytoplasm. It doesn't move stuff from place A to place B in the cell. That is where diffusion works. Okay? Diffusion moves anything. Right? Any material can be moved by diffusion as long as it's already in the cell. Right? So this is moves anything within the cell. It is also passive. So the cell has no control over it, but requires no energy for it to happen. Okay? It always moves from high concentration to low concentration, okay? Because that's how passive processes work. It is slow, and it is not targeted. Okay? It's not like mailing something to somebody. It goes from A to B. Okay? It is like making a whole bunch of copies of the letter, throwing it up in the air, and hoping the wind will take it there. Okay? As long as you're sending that letter to your neighbor, you're probably okay, because it'll blow over the fence and land in their yard. Right? But if you're trying to send it to your grandparents in Ontario, it's probably not going to get there. Agreed? Okay, so that's how diffusion works. It goes from high to low, but it's only good over a short distance, because beyond that, the shotgun approach is not very accurate. Targeted, non-targeted. Okay, and then we also talked about active transport. It's active because it uses energy and it moves against the gradient. So it moves from low to high, unlike the other two. Okay, and it's across the membrane. It doesn't happen within the cell, just to get things across the membrane. All right. So the activity we're going to be doing is going to be looking at how well will a cell transport material as it grows. Is there an upper limit to the size that a cell can reach because of cellular transport? Because if we look around, right, there's no amoebas in this class, right? There's not an amoeba sitting in the desk between Jen and Logan over there, okay? Because cells, single cells, have an upper limit on their size because they depend on diffusion to move things within the cell. And diffusion is great over small, short distances. Over large distances, it is slow and isn't reliable to get things from point A to point B. Okay? That's why we have a circulatory system. Okay? As a multicellular organism, you're not depending on diffusion to move things from one place in your body to the other. You have an active circulatory system that does that for you. If we relied on diffusion to get nutrients from our food, from our intestines where they're absorbed, to our brain, we would die. Right? Because it would take hours for diffusion to move stuff that distance. Okay? And it would just move it everywhere. So some of it would end up in our arms before it ever got to our heads, and that wouldn't really work for us. So as a large organism, you're not depending on diffusion on a large scale. You're still depending on it on a small scale within your cells, but that's fine because all of your cells are small. Okay? Diffusion's great as long as it's not being asked to transport materials over large distances. Okay? So, give you a few minutes here. I want you to write down this paragraph, and then I'm going to talk about it. All right. So, as we saw this morning, The membrane is how everything gets into the cell. Okay? If it's water, it's getting through there by osmosis, maybe through pinocytosis. If it's hormones, it's being engulfed by the membrane. If it's food, it's being engulfed by the membrane. Okay? So things have to get into the cell through the membrane, and then once they're in the cell, they rely on diffusion to move from the membrane to wherever it is they're supposed to go. Wherever they're supposed to go is probably got a very low concentration of that stuff. So they are naturally going to move in that direction because it's down their gradient, and that's how diffusion works. Okay? And because most cells are quite small, that process is going to work effectively. Okay? Here's the thing. As a cell grows, so we've got a small cell here. Okay? As this cell grows, its surface area, that is how much membrane it has, also has to grow. Right? It would be like if you grew from the inside and your skin didn't grow. Right? Obviously, that would end badly. Right? So as you grow, your skin needs to grow as well. Well, it's the same for a cell. But remember that surface area, that is the membrane, is only two-dimensional. It has length and it has width. Okay? If I break open the cell, I lay the membrane, it's flat. Okay? But the cell also has volume. And volume is three-dimensional. It's length and width and height. So as I increase the size of a cell, yes, its surface area increases, but its volume gets bigger way faster. Okay? Its volume gets bigger way faster because I've got to fill up all that extra space. And it's not just the length and the width I've got to increase, it's the length, the width, and the height. So I'm getting a lot bigger, a lot faster. Okay? So here's the problem with that. If we imagine that, let's say, this small cell is Calgary in, like, let's say 1950. Okay? Would it have taken you as long to drive from one part of Calgary to the other in 1915 as it does today? No, because Calgary was way smaller. And there was less traffic. Okay? Now, granted, the roads would have been smaller, things like that, but still, Calgary wasn't as big. So you could very easily get from point A to point B quickly. Right? But now, because Calgary is growing, it takes longer to get from one side of Calgary to the other. Okay? Not only are there not really as many direct routes as there once were, okay, it's further from one place to another. I'm not saying that as Calgary grew, you know, these two addresses got farther away from each other. Obviously, they stayed put. Okay? But what I'm saying is that as Calgary grew, if you ended up out on the outer edges of the city, okay, like let's say you live in Bridlewood, okay, down here, right? It's going to take you a long time to get to, let's say, Country Hills. It's up here, okay, on the north end. Whereas when Calgary was really small, it wouldn't have taken you as long to get from the very southern part of Calgary to the very northern part of Calgary because Calgary wasn't as big. Everybody follow there? You're still doing it in the same way. You're still driving from here to there. Okay? But because Calgary is so much bigger, it takes a lot longer to do that now. It's the same for a cell. If a cell is relying on diffusion, when it's small and when it's big, it's going to take longer for diffusion to do the job when the cell is big. Right? And we're still representing the cell here in 2 dimensions, but the cell is actually 3-dimensional. Right? There's this, you know, this other area of, or this other dimension of volume, okay, that we have there. It's not like Calgary, which is also 2-dimensional. It's the space surrounding it as well. Okay? So we've got this real problem with moving things by this slow process. Okay? The other real problem isn't so much that they're also now further away than they used to be, but that the process of getting there involves a spreading out. Okay? When the material only had to go from here to here, it couldn't spread out very much between those 2 points. But when it's got to go from here to there, that's a lot further. It's going to get a lot more spread out between those 2 points. Does everyone kind of follow me on that? Okay, so that's kind of what this thing up here is talking about. Okay, diffusion is too slow to supply the needs of very large cells. As a result, cells don't typically reach very large sizes. Okay, the biggest cells are going to be maybe you know, a couple of thousand micrometers, and those would be rare. Most cells are quite a bit smaller than that. Okay, typical cells within your body are maybe 100 micrometers across. Okay? Very small, because the smaller you are, the more effective diffusion is at transporting materials. Okay, is that part kind of making sense on there? Okay, mathematically speaking, if I want to calculate the surface area of, let's say, a cube, Okay, all the sides of a cube are a what shape? Square, right? There's 6 squares that make up a cube, right? So if I want to calculate the surface area of a cube, I go length times width, holding the eraser, dummy. Okay, I go length times width times the number of cubes, or the number of squares, sorry, so 6. Okay, so length times width gets me the area of 1 square, and then I multiply that by 6, and I've got the area of the whole cube. Everybody with me there? So there's really only 2 dimensions to that, length and width. If I want to calculate the volume of the cube, I go length times width times height. Okay, that's 3 dimensions as opposed to the 2 here. I know there's a third number here, but it's not part of this. Okay, so let's say that I had a cube that was 10 by 10 by 10. So I would go 10 times 10 times 6, and I would get that this cube has a surface area of 600 micrometers. Okay, if it's micrometers, if it's a cell, it's really small, right? That same cube has a volume of 1,000 micrometers because it's 10 by 10 by 10. Okay? Now, let's say I increase the size of the cube. Right? Let's say I make the cube now, instead of being 10 by 10 by 10, I make it 20 by 20 by 20. So I double its size. What's going to happen to its surface area? Will it get bigger? Okay. Will its volume get bigger? Which one will get bigger than the other? Volume or surface area? Volume. Okay. So let's have a look at that. So let's say now I'm going 20 times 20. That's 400. Okay. Times the number of sides, 6. So 400 times 6 should give me 2,400 square, actually that should be, sorry, square micrometers. Okay. And this would be cubic because it's volume. Okay. So squared. And then 20 by 20 by 20. So see how this number stayed the same as it did up here, right? But this one got bigger, right? So my volume is going to get bigger faster. So 20 by 20, so what's 20 cubed? Drawing a blank. 8,000 cubic micrometers. All right, so 2,400 divided by 600, how many times bigger did that get? 4 times. Yeah, it got 400% bigger. Yeah, so it got 4 times bigger. How much bigger did this get? 8. Okay, see how the volume increases faster than the surface area does? Okay, that's bad for a cell because it is supplied by its surface area. Everything has to come in through the membrane. Okay, so your membrane only gets a little bit bigger, but the volume it has to supply and transport through gets bigger faster. Okay, so it's almost an exponential effect. The bigger a cell gets, the worse off it's going to be in terms of being able to diffuse things around. Okay, because diffusion's got to move through that entire volume sometimes. Okay, and the bigger that distance is, the slower it's going to be, and eventually that means a couple of things will happen. Parts of the cell are going to essentially starve, maybe not food-wise, but starve in terms of they're not getting what they need. And other parts of the cell are going to be poisoned because the toxins that are trying to get to the membrane and get out are taking longer to do that. Okay? They're not getting broken down as quickly, or they're not getting to the smooth ER where they can be broken down because it's too far away, and essentially the whole process breaks down as the cell gets bigger. And we saw that as Calgary grew. Okay? If you remember, you guys are pretty young, but okay, there used to not be the Deerfoot extension, like there used to not be Deerfoot. Right? The only way to get through Calgary was on McLeod, and you crossed the bridge through downtown, and it was a mess. Okay? It took forever to get through Calgary that way. Then they built Deerfoot Trail. Okay? Slowly, they eventually got it to go all the way through. But then Calgary grew so much that Deerfoot became a parking lot. If you've ever driven through Calgary on Deerfoot, you know. Okay, well, then what did they do? They built Stony. Okay? Stony, you can get through Calgary reasonably quick on Stony. You have to go outside a little bit, but it's still quicker a lot of times, especially during rush hour, to get all the way through the city on Stony than it is to take Deerfoot. Right? So as the city grew, we had to have more ways to get through the city. Until we got those, transport slowed to a crawl. Okay, so it works exactly the same in a cell. Transport can only go so fast and over so much area. Okay, or over so much volume. Okay, the bigger that gets, the tougher that situation is going to be. All right, questions on how that works? Okay, so keep those notes, make a mark beside them because you're going to want to save these, and I'll attach this podcast to the activity we do on Thursday as well, okay, because it'll be important for answering a lot of the analysis questions for that activity.